All right, guys, how many of you have grandmas, grandmothers, gamma, mama? How many of you have them that's still living? If you have a grandma, grandmother, gamma, whatever that's still living, you're going to love this story. You're going to love it. We're going to Chatsworth, Georgia, which is about 85 miles north of Atlanta, the ATL. So Chatsworth, Georgia police used taser on an 87-year-old woman using a knife to cut dandelions. Now, her great-nephew was quoted as saying, if 3 police officers couldn't handle an 87-year-old woman, you might want to reconsider hanging up your badge, said the great-nephew. Chatsworth, Georgia Police Chief Joshua Etheridge said an officer was justified, of course he did, in using a taser to stun an 87-year-old woman after she didn't obey their commands. Do as I say or I'm punishing you. Their commands to drop a knife in her hand. Martha al-Bishara was charged with criminal trespass and obstructing an officer Friday when police held her at gunpoint before bringing her to the ground with a jolt from the electric prongs of a stun gun. So they were able to get close enough to stun her, but not close enough to knock the knife out of her hand. 87-year-old woman. Listen, there's more. Bashara's relative said she doesn't speak English and was merely out cutting dandelions with a knife near her home in Chatsworth, which again is about 85 miles north of the ATL. Chief Joshua Etheridge was quoted as saying, an 87-year-old woman with a knife still has the ability to hurt an officer. He also said, and I didn't write the quote, but something to the effect of, there was no malice. We used the lowest form of force that we could. Well, no, you could have gotten close to her. If you get close to her to stun her with electric prongs, you could get close enough with your little baton to knock the knife out of her hand. Listen, you're going to hear why. If the employee who called 911 was telling the truth, most likely they were. Chief Etheridge responded with 2 other officers Friday after an employee of the local Boys and Girls Club of Chatsworth, which covers Murray County, called 911 to report a woman with a knife was walking and would not leave. The employee was quoted as saying on 911, looks like she was walking around looking for something, like vegetation to cut down or something. There's a bag, too. Now, Chief Etheridge threw his own knife to the ground to communicate with Bashara in telling her, drop the knife. So again, there is a quote, and it's in the whole story. I will put a link to the whole story in the description box below, as always. And in that story, you'll see a quote that I didn't write down for time's sake. But it was something to the effect of he was the chief saying, well, there was no malice. We just used the lowest form possible. But you could get close enough to hit her with a stun gun, but not knock the knife out of her hand with a baton, or hold the baton and say, hey, anything to that effect. And I don't know, I'm armchair quarterbacking. Maybe an officer did have a baton out, but he couldn't knock the knife out of her hand, but they could stun her. 87-year-old woman, not a 27-year-old man that can move like a gazelle. An 87-year-old woman that the employee that called 911 was quoted as saying she has difficulty walking around, it looks like. I don't know. I want to hear from you guys. News Now Ukaipa, chime in on this one in the comment section below. Police tase an 87-year-old woman that has difficulty walking because she wouldn't obey their commands to drop the knife. They could get close enough to stun her, but not close enough to knock the knife out of her hand with a baton. And I'm not talking about injuring her. I'm just talking about knock the knife out of her hand, then go, the knife's out, grab her. No, we're going to stun her because we want to see her flop around on the ground like a fish. Haha, look, we stunned an 87-year-old woman. Let me know what you guys think.